الدنيا زي السكر.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us in this, how would I put it? It's a horrific episode. It's about October 7th, and a lot has been said about October 7th and the controversial elements of it. And personally, as Silent Majority, we've thought about it, and as complicated as this topic is, I felt like, and the team felt like we were obliged to actually cover this topic because this podcast is about British Muslim taboos. And eventually will extend to other ethnicities and other cultures and religions. But primarily, I can certainly say that every British Muslim that is watching, at least once throughout the day, they think about Palestine and Gaza and what's happening in this terrible, terrible war. Now, the topic today is what led to October 7th. I have with me my honourable guest. Thank you very much. You're a man of the Middle East, and your stay in London is only for a few days. So I'm very fortunate to have caught your attention, and you've been quite generous to agree to come onto our podcast. My guest today, Abdul Al-Khadiri, whom is a documentarist and a filmmaker, has heavily involved in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, not even that. I was in the Ukraine war when it first started as well.
Okay, so
and
you
then
were
Sudan war.
so you were covering
2019. Yeah.
So can I call you a journalist?
Yeah, of course.
Yep. So you're a journalist that covers humanitarian crisis
Yes.
and war zones. Thank you very much for joining us. And it's quite extraordinary that, as we're recording, only yesterday, Yahya Sinwar was killed
in combat.
in combat in a gunfight by IDF soldiers. And it's remarkable. His predecessor, what's the predecessor's name?
Ismail Haniyeh.
Ismail Haniyeh. Was he the
Ismail Haniyeh.
Ismail Haniyeh? He was the predecessor to
Yes.
Hamas. So he's only been in. How long has Yahya Sinwar been in power now?
I mean, he was elected the second time in 2021 as the head of Hamas.
Right.
And then he was elected again after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Iran.
Iran. Okay. So we will come back to that. Just before we start, I'd like to thank my main sponsor, Ahyaan Estate. If you're a landlord or a tenant and you have a property to give, or you want to rent a property, you're in capable hands, reach out to Ahyaan Estate. Right, without further ado, let's start with Yahya Sinwar. So he was killed in gunfight or in a battle with
Correct.
IDF soldiers only yesterday, which is remarkable. And his premiership or his tenure in power was only maybe a month.
I mean, technically, yeah, after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, yes, he was technically in about a month or a few weeks. But he was a leader of Hamas 2 times before that.
2 times prior to that.
Yes.
Okay.
The last one was in 2021. And, you know, the Israelis said at the beginning they've killed him in combat by accident. Because they thought they were saying the whole time that he's hiding in tunnels. In fact, he wasn't. He was fighting with, you know, as the rest of the Hamas.
So he's a general and a soldier.
Pretty much.
So something that just came out from TRT World, Hamas have lost their beloved leader, and a Hamas official, Khalil Al-Hayya, stressed that they vowed that the resistance will continue up until all of the hostages are released and the cessation.
On both sides.
No, I don't think from both sides. It's more the hostages that I think they're alluding to that Israel are keeping as detainees. So prisoners.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for Hamas, they call them hostages.
They call them hostages.
Because these detainees are held without any charge.
Any due process.
Nothing.
Yeah. So this Hamas official, his name is Khalil Al-Hayya, and I think it's notable to say in this podcast and to my audience that they will not be released until the complete cessation of Israeli aggression on Gaza. So he's talking about the hostages that they do have in return for the complete cessation of the attrition or the aggression on Gaza.
I mean, what's the possibilities of that? We're going to have to go through history. Um,
And that's why I've brought you on.
Israel have never wanted to negotiate on anything. And similar to Ismail Haniyeh and similar to Yahya al-Sinwar, they have almost assassinated every single Hamas leader, from Ahmed Yassin, Abdul Aziz al-Rantisi, Ismail Haniyeh, and Sinwar, pretty much all of them. So when it came to negotiations, Israel never really wanted to negotiate because it felt like they had to compromise. They even came up with a solution so they don't have to negotiate anymore, especially on hostages. That solution was called Hannibal Directive. I'm pretty sure you heard of it.
Yes.
But for the people that never heard of Hannibal Directive, it's a protocol created by the IDF to find the solution of having to negotiate over Israeli hostages, whether it's civilians or military. That protocol stated if an Israeli citizen or military was being in the process of being captured, open fire, kill both the kidnapped and the kidnapper.
So collateral damage.
Collateral damage.
Thanks for that introduction. We can talk about this matter, particularly Yahya Sinwar and the leadership of Hamas and what happens in the future for days to come, and we won't run out of words to say. What I'd like to focus on, particularly in this particular episode, is what led to October 7th, because Antonio Guterres, the UN secretary, General Secretary, he said, after the events of October 7th, he came out and he said something quite profound and something quite daring and controversial. And he said, what did you expect? This didn't come out of nowhere. Essentially, this didn't come out of a vacuum. Yeah. His rhetoric confounded general international narratives, where up until now, the oppression, and some have gone as far as to call it apartheid, various human rights groups like Amnesty International, B'Tselem, who is, if I may say, a Israeli human rights organization.
Yeah.
So an organization from within Israel has said that this is an ongoing apartheid.
Yes.
You've got South Africa that have leveled a case of genocide, plausible genocide.
And many countries joined it.
Many countries
even
have
European
joined it,
countries
yeah.
like Spain.
So there is a chorus and there's a queue of countries that have joined this chorus of saying that there's apartheid, potential genocide, even to the extent that an organization, a very reputable organization within the confinements of Israel, B'Tselem, have said that this is an ongoing repression, apartheid. Now, October 7th, if we go on the rhetoric and on the statement of Antonio Guterres, who said this didn't come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
If I have it precisely, and there's so many numbers, which is why I have my phone with me, 56 years of occupation.
76.
76 years. I think he said 56, but with your history and knowledge, you've said 76.
76.
Now, I want to take you back to those 76 years. So start me off with British rule.
I mean, we're almost hitting we actually did hit 100 years of the Palestinian area issue. It all started when the British Empire declared war on the Ottoman Empire in 1914. That's the start of the whole Palestine war region. And 2 months after the start of the declaration, there was a memo being circulated in the War Cabinet, and that memo was called the Samuel Memorandum. And basically, it was by a Zionist politician called Herbert Samuel, and that memo focused on two things. Talking from a strategic point, obviously, because Britain was going into a war against the Ottoman Empire. So the politician the memo focused on the most important aspect, which was the strategic win. The British Empire needed to secure a guaranteed win. Regardless of the outcome of the war, they needed to guarantee a win, and that was by having Palestine after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. And at the same time...
When you say having Palestine, do you mean in order to beat or defeat the Ottomans,
Yes,
the British needed the Arabs on their side.
pretty much. Yes, that was in the Battle of Beersheba. But that was later on in 1917, because the Ottoman Empire collapsed in 1922. So in the 1914, when the memo, sorry, we were speaking about the memo. The second part of the memo was for the British prestige to glorify around the world and to do the Jews a big favor, and putting them in a forever lasting gratitude by giving them their promised land. So that's when in the 1970s, 17, the Arabs and the British were hand in hand in toppling the Ottoman Empire in Palestine. So that was the battle of Beersheba.
Okay,
And
just to clarify,
that happened on the 31st of October,
Okay.
1917.
Okay.
So that day, the Arabs thought like, okay, we just freed ourselves from the Ottoman Empire. So we got rid of them. On the 2nd of November, 1917, 2 days after, the Balfour Declaration was signed.
Balfour Declaration, yeah.
Yes. So that was 2 days after the Arabs thought like, yes, the Britain helped us topple the Ottoman Empire, and now
So they
we're
effectively
free.
signed their death warrant
Yes, but because of the Samuel
memorandum.
memorandum,
Yeah.
they, like the Britain as well had some sort of obligation towards the Jewish population back then. So that's why the Balfour Declaration was a sign for the Jews who's been pushed away from all over the world to finally have a national home in Palestine. That was the purpose of the
I want to
Balfour
stick
Declaration.
with the Balfour Declaration because you are right and quite apt to say that the British ruled the world.
Yes.
1917, this momentous battle took place.
Yeah.
And then Arthur Balfour, the then Foreign Secretary, said that he promised the Jews a homeland.
Yes.
And that was the zenith or the birth of the idea. But prior to that, wasn't there a Zionist politician in the 1890s? Am I mistaken here?
Yeah, I mean, like in the support. Yeah, the support was the support was rising in the 1820s.
1820s, yeah.
Yes, the 1820s.
There was
and the
appetite
cause
for
yeah.
the appetite for land in Jerusalem.
Yes, but you have to understand. I'm not really an expert on the in the Jewish religion, but from what I've seen, especially in the protest, where you see the ultra-Orthodox or the religious Jews, they're against the establishment of a Jewish state. But at the same time, you have the Zionist movement who are not as...
Which is not religious, it's a secular...
Which are not really as religious.
No.
Or like they're committed to religion as much as the...
They're a secular ideal, and a lot of
Correct.
Jews would say that. It's interesting to note to my audience, and I'm not sure if you knew, that at the time the British ruled and the Balfour Declaration came to effect, the population of Jews in Palestine, without the occupation, without any illegal settlements or anything, was 6%.
Yeah, I think it was somewhere about between 60,000 to 85,000 Jewish people in Palestine.
So that roughly amounts to what I've said, 6%, right?
Yes, correct.
Okay. Now let's fast forward. So we've established where this came about from, and a quickly summary: the Ottoman Empire was toppled in World War One. The Balfour Declaration happened, and there was a rising sentiment, particularly from this Zionist ideology, that we need a homeland, or what's the more acute word?
Going back to standing on the population
Yep.
point, is you're talking about 6%, which is technically still a minority in the region, and that's where mass immigration happened from Europe to Palestine. You're talking about a number of 130,000 Jewish immigrated between 1933 and 1936. So this area was becoming a little bit more hostile because the Jews who were coming from Europe were facing a lot of discrimination, prosecution, and so
Anti-Semitism.
pretty much very crazy
That
anti-Semitism.
was the birth of anti-Semitism.
Yes.
Prior to Hitler.
Yeah. Prior, like
It was
you're
prior
talking
to
about,
Hitler.
you're talking at least 20 years
20 years prior to Hitler.
prior to Hitler. So,
Yeah.
you know, the most of the prosecutions came from religion causes. So the Christians in Europe saw the Jews as the killers of the Messiah or the Prophet Isa, peace be upon him. So, and they didn't follow him and they didn't believe in Jesus. And
So did you think, and sorry to cut you off,
Yeah.
did you think that, and it was a very notable point, that because of the persecution that the Jews faced across Europe,
yeah,
they fled, and this,
to the more welcoming environment because there was already 83,000 Jews living in Palestine. They were living a
Already.
normal life
yeah,
compared to
side by side.
625,000 Muslims in Palestine.
It's worth noting here, you know, I mean, particularly to the audience that isn't Muslim,
Yeah.
that prior to, you know, calling Muslims or saying that Muslims are anti-Semite or can be
Yeah.
perceived as anti-Semite, up until that point, it was the Europeans that were anti-Semitic,
Yes.
and it was the Europeans that were persecuting, and not to mention the Holocaust, where
Tragic
Hitler,
event,
yeah,
yes.
Hitler ravaged 6 million Jews.
Tragic event.
Yeah,
But you know, like that's what I was trying to say is most likely anti-Semitism wasn't created in Hitler's time.
It's a European problem.
He
though.
grew up. Most likely he grew up in an anti-Semite
Environment,
society.
Yeah.
So, and then that, you know, the people who came from Europe was already, and especially the Zionist movement was already have heard about the Balfour Declaration, have already heard about the Samuel memorandum.
Yep.
So they already thought in their head that Palestine as a whole is going to be theirs.
You're saying that seed was planted
That
from
meant- yes.
a long time ago.
Yeah, because they had promises. Look, I believe, in my personal opinion,
Sure.
I believe whatever we are going through right now, or the region is going through right now,
Yeah.
is not of a Jewish issue or a Palestinian issue. It's is the failure of an international communities. The winners of World War I and World War II done nothing, absolutely nothing. So, and I'll prove that point in when we get to 1947. But so when they came to Palestine and they started looking at, okay, this will be our new homes, but bear in mind the UK wanted to do the Jews a favor by giving them their promised land, but at the same time the Arabs fought with the British, so the British had an obligation to look out for the Arabs as well, to take care of them. So what they done is they put a mass restriction on Jewish immigration between Europe and Palestine.
Okay, so they
That's the
curbed
British.
it. Okay.
Put restrictions. And on top of that, they forbid Jews from buying land or owning land in Palestine. That's the British forbidding them.
How ironic that is now, up until this date. So they were forbade by Britain at that time to
Yeah.
buy anything. So immigration was restricted
Yeah.
because they felt like they owed Arabs a favor because the Arabs helped topple the Ottomans. They restricted Jews from coming in droves and also forbade them
Completely.
from buying any property or land.
Yes.
So essentially, they're guests to Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, like they were the British Commission was a governing body, so they had to make sure that even the demands of some Zionist leaders were rejected by the UK government or like the British government back then, because they just thought it was
Outrageous.
outrageous. You know, you
Yeah.
can't displace. You're talking about nearly 2 million, 2 or 3 million, or a few million Arabs completely out of Palestine, one go. And that's where the idea of we'll do 2/3 Arab state and 1/3 Jewish state. Obviously, that would come on in 1947.
So I want to fast track and fast forward to the UN. In between the time when there was an exodus of Jewish Europeans leaving Europe
Yeah.
to flee persecution to the Middle East and particularly Palestine,
Yes.
there were skirmishes between Arabs and Jews up until that point because there was too many Jews from Europe coming to Palestine. And
I
it was a
mean-
cultural change, a socio-economic change, an ethnic change.
I mean, back then it was more like it was more like refugees fleeing the atrocities they've seen in Europe, and they came in with, I don't know if you've seen the picture of the boat,
Remarkable how, in this day and age, how refugees are perceived by some countries and some member states as, well, they're treated in inhumane ways, without mentioning countries specifically. Let's go to the UN partition. So the British handed over their hand.
Well, I mean, they didn't. I just want to get to that point. I just want to clear one point before, because I want to talk about why did Britain partition that mandate. It was because, so we spoke about how it restricted Jews from immigrating to Palestine, and it forbid them from
Buying land. Yeah.
That caused the Jews to buy the same hand that gave them the promised land, and they fought the British.
So the Jews fought the British.
Yes, and at one point there was the most famous attack. Like in between 1944 and 1948.
Yeah.
That was when the Jewish insurgency started, and they started attacking the British Commission. Almost 140 soldiers were killed.
British soldiers.
Were killed by the Jewish insurgency. And one of the most famous attacks is the King David Hotel, where they bombed, the Jewish militias bombed the hotel, and they killed...
That was in Jerusalem, right?
Yes. And they killed 91 people. And even the back then Prime Minister in House of Commons called it a terrorist attack.
I think at the time it was Clement Attlee.
Yes.
So just to clarify, Clement Attlee, the British government of the time, called the Zionist movement, the Zionist militia, a terrorist group.
In the House of Commons.
In the House of Commons. Check that up.
So then it was, Britain was having a hard time dealing with this, because obviously you have at one hand like the growing number of Jews in Palestine, where Arabs started to have concern, like there's a flood of refugees coming, and they pretty much don't know what's coming ahead, in terms of the partitioning. And at the same time, you have the Jews having an issue, well, technically fighting the British mandate.
I just want to ask you a question. I don't expect you to answer it.
Yes.
But the question needs to be said.
Yes.
Who decided that Palestinian Arab land should be carved up? Who decided? And what I mean by that is, in order for me to decide, if I was sitting in your house, this is your house now, this studio, and I'm an external person, and I decided I'm going to carve your house up, on what grounds? So all of these partitions that happened, who is it that decided that it's my obligation to carve up your house?
Religion books.
So there isn't an answer for that. So it does come back to religion. Yeah. But ultimately, the logical question here is
the same way, like, same way Jews and Jewish people see the Palestine as promised land through this holy site.
Yeah.
Muslims see it as well.
But the thing is, if you look at it from the letter of the law, Palestinians, as established, what you've just said, from 1917 onwards and prior to that, 94% of the population were Muslim. And prior to 1917, Ottomans ruled for 1400 years, or the Islamic Empire was there for 1400 years. So by default, it's Arab land.
Yeah.
What's remarkable, and we always skip past this question, is how can I come to your house and then decide you're going to only have a portion? It doesn't make any sense. I'm not expecting you to answer the question.
No, I know it does. I agree. I'm agreeing with you. It doesn't make any sense, logical sense.
So many wars have ensued from that decision that I'm going to give half or more than half of your land or your home to someone else. Until this day, there's ongoing bloodshed.
It wasn't like that. It was like, again, Britain, the British Empire, won World War I, World War II. So they were more like the governing body of the world. So
than America.
Yeah. I mean, to me, to this day, I find Britain is still controlling the whole world. Personally.
Interesting assertion.
Personally.
I just feel
like US is just powers.
Yeah?
Personally. US is just powers.
That
But
geopolitical.
the whole governing is still in the UK.
You think so?
100%.
I think the British are very good at diplomacy and they're very good at tact and strategy. But that's another question altogether, right?
That's for a different episode.
Let's
Go
go
back
on
to
to
the
the
partitioning.
UN partition plan. So that is when there was teeth that bit, because the precursor asked you about the question that I've come to your house and given someone else 55% without your consent, without anything.
It wasn't 50. Look, I'm trying to be as impartial as possible.
Sure.
It wasn't 55%. But as you're comparing it to a house, to the British Empire, this house they deemed it as unworkable. For Arabs and Jews are fighting the whole time because they wanted one out of the other, and Jews wanted Arabs out, and Arabs were against it, and Britain found itself trying to control something that was uncontrollable. What they've done, they recommended to partition this crazy house. Fights everywhere. To partition it into 2 states. 1/3 is Jewish state,
Right.
and 2/3 Arab state.
This was prior to the UN partition plan.
No, this is the UN partition plan.
Under the resolution 181,
Yes.
and I've got a source documented Al Jazeera, the UN partition plan resolution 181, the allocation was that the Jewish state would comprise 55%, the Arab state would be 45% under the UN partition plan resolution 181.
Yeah.
So that was the initial resolution. So essentially it's a 2-state.
Yeah, but I think the way the UK presented it at the beginning wasn't we're just not gonna, because again, the Arabs fought with the British. So Britain is not gonna come out of nowhere and say, you know what, we're gonna divide this country by half and give you 45% and we're gonna take 55%. So the publicity of it was, we're gonna make a small Jewish state and an Arab state and a mandatory zone, which is Jerusalem, because of its holy site to many religions, not just Muslims.
Particularly East Jerusalem.
Yes. So in November 29, 1947, that was when the resolution 181 was adopted. 1 day later, November 30th, 1947, a civil war broke out in Palestine between Israel and Palestinians, and the Arab neighboring countries went into a war. Each of them have their own reasoning. Again, Palestine to Muslims, you're talking about Arabs, you're talking about Muslim majority. So you have an important shrine in Islam, important
Monuments.
holy places in
Al-Aqsa.
Al-Aqsa Mosque and
The Wailing
Dome
Wall.
of Rock. So these monuments were not to be touched.
Well, the greatest religions in the world share a piece there. The Wailing
you have
Wall.
the Cry Wall as well.
Is it the Wailing Wall? The Wailing Wall.
The Wailing Wall.
The Wailing Wall. You've got St. John's Cathedral? I may be wrong there, but there's 3 or 4 monuments that are.
I mean, I'm specifically talking about
Jewish
and
yeah.
Muslims.
But the Christian, there's a Christian element there as well.
I'm pretty
And
sure
they have invested interest there. So yes, you're saying this. You're probably going to talk about the Nakba now, aren't you?
So this thing started, and the reason why I feel like it broke out so crazy again, because Britain have lost hope in controlling the British mandate. So as soon as the resolution was adopted, Britain refused to participate in any sort of leadership, in any sort of. The most important thing, bear in mind, these 2 entities have been fighting since the mass immigration to Palestine.
From Europe.
So to just leave the house, them 2 fighting, and you told them just to create 2 states, that's not going to happen. Britain just withdrew. They did not participate in any diplomatic, power transition.
In their defense,
yes,
I'd say the UN body was set up, and the UN body, it was a transition of power from Britain
Yes,
to the UN body. Yeah.
The UN requested the British Empire to get involved in the transition of power. So how the Israeli government or the Israeli state would be formed and how the Palestinian state would be
So
formed.
they are you saying they abstained or they just absconded? They just said we don't want anything to do with
We
it.
don't want anything to be involved. That's it.
We've done our part. It
They've
didn't
done
work.
their parts, and they've, they lost soldiers. They lost 141 exact soldiers.
And they called the Zionist militia
To the
group a
people that
terrorist.
they gave them their promised land, So Britain was
So
like,
did Britain feel like they were backstabbed then?
I think that's why they left it, to be honest. They said, you know what, like, we'll just let things resolve and let things take course. And that's the issue. That created bloodsheds over bloodshed. That's why I said, like, the issue of the land of Palestine is probably the over promises the Jewish were, they were imagining. The Jews imagined so much where they would take the whole land of Palestine, and the Arabs were lied to, and they, even after 1947, they never got a land, and even so, that's where the Nakba started. That war ended between Israel and the Arabs. That war ended with 15,000 Palestinians killed, more than 700,
750,000 to be precise.
more than 700
You're saying
thousand people displaced, and most of them went to
Gaza.
today's Gaza Strip,
As
Gaza,
dubbed as open air prison.
pretty much.
Just because the Nakba, which in Arabic means, please, what does the Nakba mean?
the catastrophe.
The catastrophe.
Yes.
So the Nakba in Arabic means the catastrophe.
Yeah.
The Israelis call it their independence war, was it?
Yeah.
Their independence war.
Yes.
And in that war, just 2 minutes.
That's where they had the French president Emmanuel Macron when
Yeah.
he said it in a closed meeting.
Yep.
And it wasn't supposed to be published to the world, or to the media at least. And he said Israel was created by a UN resolution. That's after the French forces were attacked in Lebanon through the UNIFIL program.
Okay.
So going back to Al-Nakba,
Yep.
this is where Israel that militias, the Jewish insurgencies.
Yep.
That's when it turned from quickly, because they've been fighting British forces for 4 years. They quickly gathered and turned that militia into one massive army, and that's how quickly they managed to suppress Palestinians and occupy. They went to occupy 80% of Palestine as a land.
And by extension, the Golan Heights in Syria.
That's in the Nakba, which
That was
is
the
in
next one.
1967.
1967.
But we're talking about Al Nakba. So they captured 80%
Yep.
of the Palestinian land, and there was never a Palestinian state. Till this day, there's no Palestinian state.
So
From Nakba, 1948.
Okay, so 1947, the UN partition plan,
Yeah.
according to Al Jazeera and all the sources out there, 55% was allocated to Israel and 45% to Palestine. The British washed their hands off everything. The transition of power went to the UN. That fell on deaf ears. Israel then held their first Nakba, their first independence, and in one clean swoop, appropriated 80% of Palestinian land.
That's 55% more than what was
promised to them.
Yeah,
Until this
under the
day,
Resolution 181.
it can't even be argued. It's almost incontrovertible.
Yeah.
Till this day, that can't be contested because they haven't given any land back. If anything, they've encroached more land.
Yeah, so
illegally.
that's what happened in the Nakba in 1967.
That
So
leads us to
it didn't really stop at the 80%.
Yeah, no,
It did not stop
it
at
didn't
the
stop, no.
80%. As I said, like that, you're talking about the Palestinians again were going through hell. They're going through suppression. They were living under military control. They had restriction of movements and stuff. So obviously that keeps causing tension, and that's where there was like tensions building up between Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Syria. And when Egypt decided to close the Sinai Canal to
The Suez Canal.
Suez Canal, sorry,
Yep.
to the Israeli ships, Israel took that as a reason for a war, and it launched a war. The
Didn't
6 Day War.
Didn't France and Britain get involved in that war as well?
No, it was only
There wasn't.
as far as I know.
I'm sure I've read that the French and the British, in arms, in league with the Israelis, went to Egypt and had a war in Egypt, which they eventually withdrew from because they lost that war. And
yeah,
that was to
that's
do.
the 6 Day War.
Is that the 6 Day War?
That's the 6 Day War, and it's called the Nakba as well, because
What's it called?
the Nakba.
The Nakba.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Nakba.
Come on, Habibi, come on.
I know. I'm trying to find like the proper term for it. Al Nakba, which is in definition, it's similar to the catastrophe.
The catastrophe.
Yeah, it's similar to
But
it.
did they win that war? Or am I?
What? Who?
Israel.
Yeah, they won.
Okay,
That
so
war.
I think I've conflated another war because it was the French and the British that went into the Suez Canal. They went into Egypt to
that's-
overthrow the then president.
That's World War One.
There's all one. I'm getting
Yeah,
separated.
that's no.
Okay, yeah. So the 6 Day War. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I've got conflated.
Yeah.
So the 6 Day War, the Independence War.
Yes.
In that war, are you saying that the 80% or more than 80%? Because this.
Yeah, they
eight-
went on to even more than the 80%.
Multi, yeah.
They captured. So it wasn't. But this time, the occupation wasn't only in Palestine.
Yep.
It went to Syria. They got the Golan Heights. They went into Egypt. In the Sinai,
Sure.
they occupied it, and they went to Jordan, in the West Bank, and mainly East Jerusalem. That's what they occupied. And then that was the main issue from that Nakba, the 1967 occupation, was the occupation of the Gaza Strip. So imagine, since 1948, the Nakba, refugees been living hell in the Gaza Strip after being murdered and displaced, and now Israel have came back to them again in 1967, and they've been living for under the Israeli occupation for about 1987. That's when the first
Intifada. Just before the Intifada, and you go into the Intifada, it's worth noting a statistic here that East Jerusalem was occupied by Israel in 1967. Now, how it worked out, how the partition worked, or how prior to 1967, West Jerusalem had 354,000 Israeli citizens and 5,000 Palestinians. So the overwhelming majority in West Jerusalem were Israelis.
Yes.
In East Jerusalem, it was the diametric opposite. You had the overwhelming majority were Palestinians.
Yeah.
So the East Jerusalem is what holds the holy places for the biggest religions in the world, including our revered Al-Aqsa Masjid.
Yes.
After 1967, the population, I have it here, and these are Al Jazeera records, the Israeli settlers after 1967 were at 236,000.
Yeah.
And Palestinians were at 370,000. So from where East Jerusalem, it had hardly any Israelis, settlers, prior to 1967.
Yeah.
It now had an overwhelming and a staggering 236,600 Israeli settlers. So that sort of corroborates with your point about what happened in 1967 and the Independence War.
Yeah. They occupied about 27,000 square miles.
Without joking about it, it's almost like it's a game for them, like a bit like Monopoly. They're just building houses where they like. And now, Intifada.
So, as I said, like the Gaza Strip was living under a crazy military control. And the Gaza Strip went from being a refugee camp,
Yep.
into a concentration camp.
So, again, just for clarity, this refugee camp of over 750,000 Palestinians, What date did that occur?
Not all of them. Obviously, the 750,000 Palestinians have dissolved into the other 20% they still have from Palestine. But the majority, yes.
They came to Gaza.
Came to
When
Gaza.
they came to Gaza, which war triggered that? Was it the first Nakba or the second Nakba?
That's the second.
So
in terms of occupying Gaza.
Gaza. Okay. So 1967. So 19...
The Naksa.
The Naksa.
Yeah.
So 1948, the war occurred,
Yes.
which triggered 750,000 refugees
To be displaced.
displaced. Most of them came to Gaza.
Yes.
In 1960...
But that was Palestinian land.
That was Palestinian land.
Yes.
In 1968, in one clean swoop, that is when
They
this is
controlled
when
it.
this is when our story really starts. Yep. So in 1968, Palestinians lost control of Gaza,
Of Gaza.
and now that, as dubbed by many, is an open air
Between
prison.
1967
Yep.
and 1987,
Yep.
Gaza was not a refugee camp. It was a concentration camp. You know, so that's what sparked the first Intifada. They were thinking like, you know, we're living hell. You're talking about 1987. You're talking about almost
40 years ago.
Yeah, 40. I
We
mean, I
were,
would say
we were born not so long after.
I was born in the Oslo Accord, which we'll get to in a
Yes,
second.
same.
But that was the 1987. But do you know what triggered 1987, the first Intifada?
Tell me.
It's as simple as a car accident. A Israeli military vehicle crashed into a civilian car, and it killed 4 Palestinians. I mean, prior to that, yes, there was protest in the West Bank because there was 2 students that were shot, dead. So it was already toppling. It was already building up to that uprising, Intifada. And then that's when Hamas was created. And unfortunately, the events of the first Intifada would have 2,000 Palestinians killed. But it had an outcome. And that outcome was the Oslo Accords in 1993. Personally, I feel like the Oslo Accords was a shot or a bullet to the foot for both Israelis and Palestinians. Here's why. Israelis saw the Oslo Accords as the right for the Palestinians to exist and to form a state. Technically, that's on paper. Obviously, they didn't form a state. And to exist as a state, which means to form a government, the Palestinian Authority. But for the Palestinians, it meant one massive thing, which is recognize Israel in 1967 borders. So forget the UN. The UN partition, will, personally, I don't think we'll ever hear of it again.
It wasn't enforced.
We would never hear of it again. Now we only talk about borders of 1967.
Quickly before you go on, Yasser Arafat, he agreed to that, the Oslo Accord.
Yes.
That was presided over by Bill Clinton at the time, I think. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, at the end of the day, even Hamas changed its charter in 2017.
Yes, we'll come to that yet.
But what I'm trying to say is, you don't deal with the same issue after 20 years or 30 years. You're gonna have to change up. You're gonna have to change up and face the reality. The reality was the whole world was behind Israel, and Israel was an occupying power, and the Palestinians had
Nothing.
So
1993, and that's quite an acute moment, because that's when the Palestinian leader,
yes,
the PLO leader, Yasser Arafat, I can't quite remember the Israeli president.
Yitzhak Rabin.
Yitzhak Rabin. So both of them came together. And was he not assassinated as well?
I was gonna mention that.
Sorry. So
No, that's fine.
let me draw it together. So Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat came together.
Yes.
And in your opinion, they both conceded. On one hand, the Palestinians had to agree to the 1967 borders.
Yes.
Yep. Which were
In
made up
return for a state.
in return for a state, which
Give
were
us
made
the
up,
state.
which one can argue were made up by parties that wasn't there, and they're not governing powers, right? And on the other hand, Israel, and this is the most profound thing, Israel came to the table and recognized Palestine as a state. That I think is
It never did.
No, but the thing is, in paper it did, didn't it?
It recognized Palestinian Authority.
Ah.
So that's why till this date, when you hear any news headlines,
Yeah.
it's always Israel versus Palestinians
Okay.
or Israel versus Gazans, or you would never see a headline saying Israel versus Palestine. Never. Because Israel never recognized Palestine as a state. They recognize Palestinians, yeah, there's a Palestinian Authority. We can speak to the Palestinians through a Palestinian Authority. But Palestine doesn't exist.
So the Oslo Accord was
To them, that's to them.
was a hallmark. So you're saying Yasser Arafat signed up to just being an authority rather than a state?
No. He was given the hope. To him, he was given the hope that yes, it's not a lie anymore. It's not a dream. It's not
It's something tangible.
made up a UN resolution.
Yeah.
No, this is real. We're signing now, and this is how much Israel hated negotiations.
I mean,
They
have
even killed.
They've killed all negotiators, haven't they?
No, they've even killed their own prime minister. That's how much they hate negotiations. They even killed the person who signed the Oslo Accords that gave Israel the 1967 borders. And made Palestinian recognize it. Well, you don't need to. And after that, there would have been a mass Arab normalization where, khalas, Palestine. If Palestinian recognize Israel, thank you very much. We don't, there's no more to fight.
So-
That's Palestinians recognizing Israelis.
Okay. So I want to take you to the Hamas Charter because you've mentioned that it has been changed
Yes.
rather more recently, but there was one point in time that Hamas's charter wanted the eradication of Israel.
Yes.
Yes, and they changed that. And there was events that led up to that, and we'll come to that straight after this.
Yeah.
So all of these events, from the UN Charter, the Resolution 181, the British intervening or interjecting,
Yeah.
all of these, you're saying, according to history, never once did Israel want to come to the terms, because you can't be just crying and saying, I want a state, I want to be recognized, I want to normalize relationships, I don't want to be under threat, on one hand. And the other hand, you're pillaging, you're taking land by force, you're appropriating. Up until this day, the UN doesn't recognize the occupation of all of Palestinian land as legal. It's illegal. It's illegal settlement, recognized by many.
No. The world recognizes, the international community at least, the UN recognized Israel is an occupying power.
Yeah.
And it even solidified
Solidified,
it like a month ago, 2 months ago, through the ICJ, where they said no, the occupation is illegal of the West Bank, and you have almost 750,000 settlers in the West Bank in a place where they're not supposed to be, and more than 250 settlements. So according to ICJ, this all needs to be dismantled. These 750,000 people needs to get out, go to Israel within 1 year.
What are the chances of that?
With 1 year.
What are the chances of that? There is no chances.
Nothing.
Okay, so
because the ICJ is not.
So the topic, the
can't
question
enforce anything
again.
without the
This is
Security Council.
it's a monolith of a topic, and we can talk for days on this. But the crux of this particular episode is what led to October 7th.
Yes. So
Now-
we're gonna carry on the Intifada.
Yeah.
On like what happened. So after the Oslo Accords, the Palestinians were happy. That's it. They got a deal, but between after it finished, they never saw any results.
No, there was no fruition to anything.
They never saw any results.
Okay.
That we've signed. We waited a few years. Where's the Palestinian state?
I want to bring Hamas in.
Yeah, that's why in 1994.
1994.
You know when you said Hamas Charter had the whole
Yeah.
elimination of Gaza, or
Israel.
elimination of Israel,
Yeah.
and they would never recognize Israel. In 1994, they had an offer, and they said, "We'll put the weapons down,
Yeah.
make a truce, if you give us not Palestine as a land as a whole, whatever the PLO agreed, which is the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and not even 1967 borders, the Gaza Strip, West Bank, and Jerusalem. That's it.
Maybe 30%.
Not even that's 1994.
1994.
Whatever the PLO agreed on.
What did they agree
just give us
on a rough percentage? 30% in comparison to the 67 charter.
I don't really have the exact number.
That's fine.
So
It was significantly different
Yeah.
or smaller.
smaller,
So-
definitely smaller.
So 1994, Hamas came to the table. On one hand, their manifesto is to destroy Israel and the
Yeah.
destruction of Israel, but that same group came hat in hand in 1994 to put their weapons down. And did they also say that they will dismantle themselves in 1994 if that condition was agreed upon, where Israel gave back
Yeah.
power to the Palestinians on those three specific Gaza.
We have to talk about the reason why Hamas was created. The reason why Hamas was created back then is because there was never a military for Palestine.
There still isn't.
There isn't.
Yeah.
I mean, the only one that actually fights is Hamas, in the name of Palestinians,
But
as an army.
and
to
I have to say this, right? And it would have been really good if I had a Palestinian person sitting here that lives and breathes the air of Palestine.
I wish they have the opportunity to leave Gaza, but
Yeah,
they don't.
you can't.
Even for medical reasons, they can't.
They
leave.
can't. No. There's a blockade and all the other things. So before I lose my train of thought, with Hamas,
Yes.
they are internationally recognized by many Western powers as a
terrorist
terrorist group, right? You've just said something profound, that there is no military in Palestine. They don't have a military. And are you saying are your words your words or words from Palestinians that their army is Hamas?
Who fights? Let's just look at the map. Who fights in Palestine? Except
There are a few factions, aren't there?
there is the Saraya al-Quds, I think, in the West Bank, and Hamas.
Hamas.
But these are relatively far away from PLO and Fatah, obviously, because Fatah and Hamas had a lot of issues.
Yeah.
And Israel kind of depends on that division for them not to sort of
Consolidate
and unite,
Yeah.
because that would be a bigger threat to them. So anyway, going back for the first Intifada, when they saw nothing happen after a few years, it sparked the second Intifada, because all we had is a Palestinian authority, but no Palestinian state. Where's the promises? Where's the land? You told us we're going to land. And
When was the second
Nothing.
Intifada?
so the second Intifada started in 2000s.
So 1993 Oslo Accord, nothing happened. Second Intifada.
All the way to second Intifada
Okay.
in 2000s.
Yep.
So unfortunately, again, this Intifada have brought another 4,000 Palestinians killed. So, and bear in mind, these are numbers. These are not numbers. These are souls. These are families. These are parents, kids, brothers, sisters, cousins.
Many have
friends.
said, and I think it's definitely worth noting, even though it's banal because everyone says it now, and I think people are facing up to the truth, that on one hand, Palestinian deaths are seen as just numbers, and if it's anyone else, then it's an outcry.
Yeah.
Why isn't it that all innocent deaths are treated the same and given the utmost sincerity and the utmost importance as everyone else? Up until now, what is the death toll on Gaza now, or Palestine?
It's
44,000?
42,000,
40.
the official. But personally, I believe the number is not correct.
About
It's
100.
definitely way higher than this.
How many are under the rubble, in your estimation?
I would probably, there's not my estimation, there's agencies that speak about it, and humanitarian agencies, and they say anywhere between 150,000 to 200,000 people have been killed in Gaza. Because bear in mind, Hiroshima and Nagasaki had a 45,000 tons bomb dropped on them, and that killed roughly 150,000 people. Gaza had 85,000 tons. You're talking about nearly the double, and only 42. When you have out of, so there are 23 hospitals completely out of service at the moment, and you have 15 hospitals that are in and out
For 2 million people.
for 2 million people. So
Not to mention
overall, you
electricity.
have 38 hospitals that 1/3 of them, 2/3 of them are out of service. So how they gonna identify casualties or dead people or who's been killed or even the injured or under the rubbles? Even the first responders get bombed and shot.
Journalists get killed.
Journalists get killed. We don't know the truth. We don't know and they're not allowing foreign media. Even I
Remarkable.
think in one interview with the Israeli spokesman was speaking to Sky News, and the presenter asked them, when you're gonna allow foreign media to enter, and he said, well, we don't see it as a safe zone. So she told him, like, okay, but we can't really depend on your sources because you're not letting independent media to get into the area. And it's been 1 year.
Just touching on your explosive.
Yes.
So you mentioned Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Al Jazeera, I read this the other day. Al Jazeera said a combination of the bombings in London, in Dresden, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and another city combined. These are in massive cities. Can I just ask you, how big is Gaza?
I would say it's about 25 square miles.
So 25 square miles. There's been more explosives dropped in that 25 square miles in however many days than there have been collectively dropped on these 5 major cities: London, Dresden, Hiroshima. And these are all World War I, World War II casualties. I mean, we can throw the words genocide, we can throw the word whatever, atrocities, and all the rest of it. How can one compute that?
And we just need to go back. Oh yeah, no, it's a 25-mile long stretch.
25 miles
Long
strong
stretch. So
Okay.
it's a 141 square miles.
So thank you for clarifying that. So 141 square
Because I
miles.
couldn't remember. I remember it's the 25 miles,
Yeah.
but I don't remember. I can't remember if it was the stretch or but 25.
5 major cities combined. Al Jazeera have recorded this, and I'll put it up for the
Yeah.
screen for my audience. Have said there are more explosives being dropped, and I think the records have been broken in the short amount of days as well, in comparison to these 5 cities.
Yeah.
Think about it. Hitler in Germany went to war with the world, and Dresden wasn't bombed as much as Gaza is now.
Correct.
And bombs are being pummeled at people that have no guns, have no bombs, have no artillery. They're women with headscarves. They're children that are 2 foot tall. Obviously, I don't want to go into. It's horrifying.
It's
and
almost between 60 and 80% of the casualties are children and women. 60 to 80%.
Okay.
So, that's the issue. It's always labeled as collateral damage. I will give you example collateral damage. I'm driving. I'm on the A406.
Yeah.
I get in an accident. Yeah. Okay, I hit a bus stop. That's the collateral damage. Yeah. They told me I kill 7 people as a collateral damage. What kind of collateral damage is this? Yeah. That's not. Humans should never be considered as a collateral damage.
You're under exaggerating here, if that's even a word. 7. It's not 7. It's killing like 7,000 people.
No, I know. But as the technicality of what I'm trying to say is, the example I'm trying to give is, humans should never be a collateral damage. If you bomb a place, tell me yes, the neighbor the infrastructure was destroyed as a collateral damage. Okay, I would understand that. But you told me, in order to free, which is one of the Israel goals, in order to free seven hostages, or in a specific event, 4 hostages. In order to save 4 hostages in Gaza, you kill 400 people as a collateral damage? Doesn't make any sense.
They've mistakenly, according to them, killed their own hostages that were waving the
Israel
white flag.
have achieved a fantastic result in 1 year. They've rescued exactly 7 people, and they killed 40. I don't know how they see it
Killed
as
40 hostages
40 hostages
of their own.
Not just their own, but multinational as well.
Multinational,
but
they're
they've
hostages.
killed 40 hostages.
Hamas hostages.
Yes.
Okay, so they've killed 40 and rescued 7 and killed.
I mean, they're still
42,000 according to official statistics, and 100,000 have been maimed or mutilated or injured.
Yeah, I mean the 7 hostages were as follows. So the 2 hostages that flipped Netanyahu's mind in terms of to negotiate, and as I told you, Israel have for a long time refused to negotiate and refused to compromise, and so when there was a ceasefire at the beginning of the war, where
Yeah.
it lasted for a few weeks,
Sure.
and there was the release of more than 100 hostage, and that was the biggest hostage release Israel have ever done in the history of life. So it was only done through diplomacy, and it was temporary ceasefire.
Yeah, it was.
Imagine they released half of the hostages for a temporary ceasefire. But then there was one incident that have really put negotiations out of Netanyahu's head. And that was, he found 2 hostages in a civilian house. And then that's it. He said, I don't want to talk about negotiations anymore. I don't want to talk about peace deals. I don't want to talk about anything. I want to get the rest of the hostages by force. So there was 2 hostages found in one apartment. Apparently, according to Israeli stories, one hostage, they just found him out running, and the other 4 that I told you about,
So is
and
he
the rescue mission.
Potentially, it wouldn't be far-fetched to say that he's still adopting or electing the Hannibal Directive.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it was cancelled a long time ago, but it was definitely replaced. That's according to Israeli officials. It was definitely replaced by an unknown content. But it was that protocol was replaced. It existed and it was replaced. Are we seeing a similar effect on the ground? 100%.
Okay.
1,000,000%.
We have run out of time, depressingly, and I hope we've given the audience, and thank you very much to you, about what led to October 7th. Obviously, the narrative is Hamas
And
acted.
we just spoke about Gaza.
We only spoke about
We haven't
Gaza.
even spoken
We haven't
about
touched
the West
West Bank.
Bank
This is the crumbs.
and the detainees.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
talking about thousands. And would you ever thought in your head? So forget the IV patients that were connected to the hospital patients that were connected to the IV. Shaban al-Dalu, he burnt alive to death in 2024. Yesterday was the 1 year anniversary of the Ma'madani hospital massacre. Do you remember that bomb that hit a hospital? The very first time a bomb hit a hospital, and there was that British Palestinian surgeon, and he was doing a press conference with a pile of dead bodies underneath him. I'm pretty sure you remember.
Yes,
That was a
vividly.
it's been 1 year since yesterday. 1 year. So, are we still seeing the same images? It's getting even worse. Is it gonna stop? What we're seeing now, the war is expanding. No one is stopping Israel. The ICC chief Karim Khan have requested an arrest warrant, but in return, the whole West is.
Who's going to enforce it?
The whole West is trying to collapse the court over his
Abdullah
head.
Kadiri, you've been impassionate. Thank you very much for coming on. We've only touched the crumbs. Depressingly, we do have to stop. I'd just like to wrap up. What else is there to say? This episode was to address what led to October 7th. Now, the narrative is, and the reason I've done this episode is to give a counter-narrative, which is the narrative that is being portrayed to the world is that Hamas acted independently for its goals and aims. Now, that may be true, depending on what you believe and what facts are out there. This brother here, this journalist, Abdullah Kadir, and I sat down and we spoke about monumental events since the 1913, 1911.
And there is still many. The second Intifada having
The second Intifada, the Oslo Accords, the UN
blockade,
Charter,
the blockade of Gaza,
the blockade of Gaza, the open air prison. So, if I were to just adopt common sense, I don't know nothing about Palestine and Gaza. I don't know anything. If I was just a layman that didn't even know how to spell, all I could do is read and listen. Yeah, I can read and listen, right? If everyone is saying that this war started on October 7th, we've already touched on the crumbs about the events that led up to October 7th. Now, I'm not saying that the October 7th attack was isolated or this is when the war started. I'm just saying there's other factors and other variables that have compounded to October 7th. In short, October 7th isn't when the war started.
Can I quickly just add? You're gonna have to give me at least 2 minutes.
Sure,
Two
go on.
extra minutes.
2 minutes, go on.
Quickly, when the second Intifada, obviously the first Intifada had a significant with the whole peace treaty, Oslo Accords and stuff. The second Intifada had a complete opposite, where Israel said no more negotiations, and they imposed the blockade on Gaza in 2007, and this went on and on and on and on and on till 2023. But here's what Gaza went through. 50% of the population was facing a food insecurity because of the restrictions on
Famine.
agriculture. No, not famine, food insecurities. Which is we're talking about between 2005 and 2023. You're talking about roughly 18 years. So you're talking about 50% of Gazans faced a food security because of the agriculture and the fishing industry's restrictions. You had the collapse all of a sudden because of the blockade of the healthcare, because there was shortages on equipment and medicine. And this is the most lethal one. In 2021, there was a report by the Euromed, and they stated as follows regarding the water contamination. Do you know how high the water contamination in Gaza was? 95% of Gaza water was undrinkable. You're talking this about the article was published in 2021.
For 2 million people.
95% of the water was undrinkable. 95% for 2 million people. This was the first time the assassinated now ex-leader, Hamas ex-leader, Yahya Sinwar, this is the first time he threatened with the October 7th. 2 years before the war.
So 2 years before the war.
And then the second time again, he threatened with using the same term as he described as October 7, which is the flood, Tawafan al-Aqsa, which is the flood of Aqsa. He mentioned the word flood as in the Hamas is gonna flood Israel with soldiers, with rockets, if Gaza blockade did not end. This happened in December 2022. So that happened roughly 10 to 11 months prior to October 7. So what have Israel been doing?
So there were warnings there. The contamination, the 95% water contamination.
This is the conditions Gaza live. And you told me it started to know. You're talking about collective punishment since 2007. Collective punishment. And that's what South Africa is fighting for. What submitted last year. Or this year, at least in January.
Thank you. I have to really stop you there. I think I do need to have you on for a part 2, but we can talk about this endlessly. Do you think that the war started on October 7th? Do you really think that? I'll leave you with that point. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time where we delve into other facets of this horrific war and potentially genocide. Thank you. Bye-bye.